Hey guys, it's Olivie Blake, and this is me not writing. So, since this is Halloween week, I put on my Weasley sweater. It's a big week for me because Lovely Tangled Vices comes out on Wednesday. So, I am going to make that available slash post links to that midnight. So that's good for me. That's going to be midnight Tuesday night. That will be, I don't know what time it is. I live in LA, if that clarifies. And then also on Wednesday, my one shot that I wrote for Halloween is coming out. It's not like spooky or anything. It's actually not spooky at all. It just takes place on Halloween. That is so long. It is like 30,000 words, or gonna be. It's almost done, and it's already like 25,000. So anyway, that's going to be released in 2 parts in Ambertentia. Part 1 will be on Wednesday, part 2 will be on Thursday, and they will both be about 15,000 words. It's like kind of a lot of, it's M for mature. It's MA. It's E. So anyway, now that that's out of the way, I wish I had candy, but I don't. Actually, the reason I'm drinking coffee is because I don't have any food in my house, and if I drink wine right now, I definitely will be too drunk to go to the grocery store. So let it never be said that I am irresponsible. I don't actually have a Halloween costume this year. I think because I don't have anywhere to go, which is such a bummer. I really need to I miss Halloween. I used to be like way into Halloween. I used to have this whole box of costumes actually, and then I gave it to my sister when she went to college. I wonder where it is now, because I don't think she's that into costumes. I love them. Anyway, if you had a good Halloween costume, do feel free to let me know. I love puns. I think my favorite one that I've seen so far is Lara Jean Croft, To All the Tombs I've Raided Before. It's hilarious. It's Lara Jean from To All the Boys I've Loved Before and Lara Croft, Tomb Raider, mashed together. It was so good. Okay, let's get started. These first 3 are kind of all about writing, actually. Well, sort of. The first 2 I don't really even have good answers for, so let's see. So, while you're not writing, I have a couple questions for your consideration. 1, if your life could imitate your art in any way, what would you like to change? I've been thinking about this question for like at least a week at this point, maybe more than that. And I still don't have a very good answer for it. I think it's because I don't treat fiction like wish fulfillment. If anything, I think my art is a reflection of life and kind of what it means to be alive and what it's like to interact with other people. And like, sure, there is magic in it, but I think that's just because I don't like to limit myself to the rules of reality. So, I mean, in terms of what I would like to have from my stories, I mean, I don't really know. I guess, I mean, the friendships that are in my stories, I would say that like some of the kind of bromancy type relationships are the sort of thing that the sort of unconditional ride or die friendship, I call it a bromance, not always between 2 male characters, but I think that that sort of friendship is like the thing that is most, that I would want most, I think, from my stories. I'm not sure, well, I can definitely tell you I don't have any lifelong friends like that. I mean, my best friend I've known since high school, which is a long time, but it's not like, it's not a from youth situation. I mean, would I like to have magic? Yes. It's very upsetting to me that I don't. I think it would be a disaster to like die and find out that there was magic this whole time and I just like wasn't allowed to have it. I am like so upset just thinking about that. Kind of relate back to the first one. Your characters are very nuanced in terms of gender. Is gender something you deliberately consider in how you approach characterizations or pairings? You never seem to fall into stereotypes with that, and I was curious if that's something you've cultivated or if it's more of an intuitive or unconscious thing. You put a lot of thought into these questions. And I really had to think a lot about the answers. I would say, kind of relating back to my first answer, actually, let me back up. There are lots of lit agents that are requesting strong female characters, which I think is very ridiculous, because I don't think, like, yes, I write strong female characters, but I don't exclusively write strong female characters. That doesn't make sense. I write female characters. I write male characters. Like, I write people, whatever their personality happens to be. I don't think there is... The idea of a strong female character is kind of ludicrous if you think about it. I mean, does that mean all male characters don't have to be strong? There's plenty of weak male characters. And I think it's the word strong that indicates a particular kind of person, like especially what ends up happening with female characters in fan fiction that is not given to us in the text. Hermione Granger in the text is like not at all what she is in fan fiction. Like, we just really need to understand that this happened. I think we, who were part of that generation of growing up with Harry Potter, want to make something out of her because she is the closest female character to what we probably were. I mean, she was bookish. We were obviously reading books, so we're probably pretty bookish too. So it's not like we're going to relate to, sports queen Ginny Weasley or like Vila, desirable Fleur. So all we have is Hermione. But actually she was kind of a nag, and she wasn't very nice to the other girls. She was kind of rude actually to Lavender and Parvati, and obviously thought they were like beneath her in terms of intellect. I'm going off on a whole thing now. But the idea, I mean, it's not that we need to write female characters who are everything, right? Who are everything that we would want to be as women. So we don't need women who are beautiful and smart and, adept at fighting also. That's great to have. Like, on the one hand, let me just make it clear that, like, yeah, I want to see those characters. I want to see female superheroes. I want to see female supervillains. I want to see all sorts of things like that. But we also need to see women who are not like that, and we need to accept that there are women who aren't perfect. There's such an onus on women already, to then put it on female characters is kind of outrageous. Hermione Granger had some pretty intense, like, social inabilities, okay? And she also panicked kind of a lot. She was very panicky. She was not very calm in a crisis. She was very logical, yeah, but she kind of had trouble sympathizing with people. But that doesn't chip away from her as a character. But then why do we have to remake her into something else? Why do we have to make her over into something? We don't is the answer. We shouldn't have to. We shouldn't be expected to make her a certain kind of character that is like all of those things at once. She doesn't have to be beautiful and desirable and super quick on her feet and really good at dueling and super brilliant. Like, I understand why we do that in fiction, but we also need to see other kinds of women. We need to see certain kinds of women who are more restrained than that, or less restrained than that. And I took it straight to women, of course. I'm not totally sure what the question is addressing. I mean, I guess I have a lot of bisexual characters only because I pair them by their personalities, and if two personalities happen together and they're both women or they're both men, then that's just how it is. And because it changes so often, I usually have to make them bisexual instead of one or the other, because usually they will be with more than one gender. But I mean, my reason for that has nothing to do with their gender. So I guess I match personalities in stories the same way I would match up my friends. Literally just in the context of this story, would these two people work together? Do they have chemistry somehow? Which I don't know how, but I can always tell writing them because I hear their little voices in my head. I mean, I think the moment you start thinking about gender roles, you're already doing it wrong, right? Like, I'm not trying to prove or disprove anything about gender roles. I'm just writing about people. I think maybe modern romance is the best example of that if we're talking fan fiction. I just don't try to force people into any sort of mold, or force characters into any sort of mold, because I wouldn't want to force a person into any sort of mold. I don't know, I'm wearing a Ron sweater, like Ron Weasley. is a person who has some pretty intense, like, you know, he's got a jealousy problem. He's pretty insecure. He, like the real Ron Weasley, were he to exist, would probably need a therapist. I mean, he's like the youngest boy of 6. He's literally like the most insignificant and passed over by his mother all the time. Like, if anyone needs a therapist, Ron Weasley needs a therapist. But we still need to see him in books. We still need to see that personality type in books. We need to witness insecurity. We need to see what these different emotions look like. You can't just have characters who are immune to this sort of thing, because that is normalizing a very out of reach sort of person. We are flawed. And then that also doesn't mean writing purposely flawed characters. It's just people have their experiences, whatever those experiences are, and I try to write them true to life, true to what I think a person's circumstances would make them, regardless of gender. I don't know. I think my concept of telling stories is a little different than how people think I tell stories. I don't sit down and like plan the way they behave. I create a character who's likely to behave a certain way, and then I kind of let that go. Hi, Olivie. I was just wondering where you get the inspiration to write so much and have so many ideas. Well, I think I've said at some point that creativity is a skill, and I mean that. It's kind of a weird thing to say because I think people assume creativity is innate, and I think it is in some ways. Being imaginative is a little bit innate, but creativity you can definitely practice, because I think when you first start doing something that is artistic or creative, you're almost always imitating something else. People always tell me like, oh, I don't know how you manage to sit down and write a book. And I'm like, no, listen. I didn't just sit down and manage to write a book, because the first book you write is going to sound exactly like something else that already exists. It's going to be a super similar premise. It's going to have a voice that sounds sort of like something you've heard before, because you have to learn how to be creative. You have to learn how to kind of tap into what's yours and what you've heard before or seen before, and it's kind of hard to draw that line. You can't just sit down and create something brand new. It really is not that easy. So the first book I tried to write after having started with fan fiction was, I threw it away after like 18,000 words. I was like, this just isn't working. It feels too much like something that already exists, and like I'm kind of fighting with it to make it do what I want. I like it. I think the premise was good. It just wasn't the thing. Because the other thing about writing a book or writing anything is that you have to have the discipline to sit down and really see it through. Yeah, the first thing that you draw or the first thing that you create, it's going to look a lot like something that you've seen before. And I think the more times you work something and you work and you rework and it becomes something that is born entirely from you and your brain and your creativity, you sort of tap into that process of coming up with a thought that feels like originally yours. How do I come up with ideas? It's not like an Athena situation where I just sit down and it comes out of my brain fully formed. I think that's extremely rare. I think more likely I come up with something that is sort of familiar, like a very basic concept, like a trope even, like fake relationship, spies, and I come up with a premise that I feel like writing, something that I feel like doing, and then it becomes mine over time. I craft it into something that is mine. The idea, I feel, is very rarely original. I mean, Masters of Death is a very, it's a weird piece of work. It's super weird. But it is born from a fairy tale. It's born from the Godfather Death fairy tale. And became this totally bizarre thing that, like, I developed over time and I continually worked. And I keep saying the work and rework thing, but I think even to be a creative professional, you also have to love the grind. You have to love the grind and the hustle, which are two different things, but you have to love them both. And I don't love the hustle. I love the grind, though. I am totally willing to work something and continue working it until it form something that I want it to. And where I'm going with all this is I am not like a genius. I mean, I don't think I'm a genius. I'm pretty sure I'm not a genius. I am just a person who really cares about what I do and what I create and the story I'm telling. It's not magic the way things happen. Sometimes it feels like it. Sometimes I sit down and I'm like, oh yes, this is great, and I know exactly what I want to say, and I know exactly how I want to say it, and it's inspiration and it's wonderful. But that comes from, it's like muscle memory. That comes from having done it before. The first thing you write is always like kind of short or kind of not that great, and it becomes better if you're willing to put in the work. So I guess that doesn't really answer the question, but I think if you're like, I want to be a writer, and you're inspired to sit down and tell a story or something, and it's going to be very frustrating, and the people who take the idea and the spark and turn it into something that's finished and that's fleshed out and that's polished, those are the difference between that person and the person who sits down with a brilliant idea is just hours and hours of work. Okay, have you watched The Office? Yes. And if you have, would you share your thoughts on Jim and Pam, primarily in the last season, even more specifically in the last episode with the panel and the questions about Jim and Pam's relationship and what Pam was going to do for Jim since he left his job? Okay, so if you've never seen The Office, Jim and Pam are the main romantic couple on the show, and they are basically co-workers that fall in love. And initially Pam she's engaged to somebody else, and they take like 3 or 4 seasons at least to get together or something. It's great. It's an amazing, you want them together so bad. I can't think of anyone who doesn't ship Jim and Pam. One thing I have to say about Pam is that she lacks a lot of agency. I think if this were the real world, the thing I worry about with the Jim and Pam type relationship is that people develop crushes on their coworkers all the time, right? You're in such close proximity. And in The Office, they position this as Jim and Pam work together, but also they're meant to be together. Versus in many workplaces, it's 2 people who work together and have spent so much time together, and they start to think maybe they should be together, or maybe they deserve to be with the other person. But the fact that a woman would be engaged to another man would be more problematic in real life, I think, than it was on this TV show. So going back to my whole concept of Pam, she's a woman who lacks quite a lot of agency. It seems like she should have known earlier on that the relationship she was in was extremely problematic. They made that very obvious for us on television, but, we are only seeing certain pieces of it. We're seeing the pieces that make us want her with Jim. Whereas in real life, ideally, if you're a woman who's engaged to a man, you don't want some guy you work with popping up to be like, by the way, I've been in love with you for years. So Jim and Pam, I don't think, translate into real life all that well until they get married and they have these marital problems in season 9, which is kind of where you get this. Is it season 9 or is it less than that? I don't know. Whatever. In the last season, you get this concept. They're not a fairy tale couple. They are a real couple who argue about Jim's job. So Jim has basically no interest in his work for the entire show. Which who would? He works for a paper company. And Pam wants to be an artist, but that doesn't really work out. I kind of don't remember how it happens. I lost a little bit of interest towards the end. So the art thing doesn't work out for her. She ends up being really invested in her family, her marriage, and her kids. And Jim kind of decides he wants to do something else with his life. He's got an idea for a startup and he kind of wants to go with it. And I say all the time that people change in relationships. Jim's goals and what he wanted for his life were initially very small. He just wanted to be with Pam. He just wanted a life with Pam. But once you get the thing that you want, you're never I don't want to say you're never satisfied, but you obviously learn you want more. You want bigger things. You don't just achieve something and then you're like, I'm good here. That doesn't happen. You continue to grow. So he gets older and he has a family and he wants a more fulfilling job. It requires them moving away, and that's a huge commitment thing, and it becomes an issue for Pam, who has never wanted that. She's never really felt the need to move outside her comfort zone, and I think that's very obvious by the fact that she didn't even want to leave her unhappy relationship for someone she clearly was in love with. I don't really have any commentary on how it went. I think it was pretty obvious that the show was setting it up that Pam would eventually make the choice to try to make Jim happy, and I don't really have any thoughts on that. I mean, I think it could have gone basically either way. I mean, if it wasn't what she wanted, then she would resent him for going. If staying wasn't what he wanted, he would resent her. And this is why a lot of marriages fail, and this is why a lot of relationships fail. And part of it is the idea that Jim's view of what he wanted for his life was shifting, and she wasn't really able to move with him. I don't know if she wasn't willing or she wasn't able, but either way, she couldn't do it. And she manages to at the end, and that's kind of why they, love triumphs or whatever. But I think that's also because Pam was a person who needed to grow, and she needed Jim to push her, and she needed Jim to push her for the majority of the show. So I think it works for them. I don't know that, like, the broader audience needs to take any message from that. Because, like I said, Pam didn't have a lot of agency. She's one of those, she's not a characteristically strong female character, right? She doesn't really ever know what she wants. She kind of knows what she wants in the short term. She knows how she wants to be treated. She doesn't know what she wants from her life. It usually takes her a while to decide. But we need to see women like that because that's very true to life. Not too many women are just like, yep, I know exactly what I want. This is my dream and I'm going to chase it. Pam's dreams change quite a lot throughout the show, and it almost plays her as a little bit of a flaky character, but I don't know, we still need to see that. We still need to experience that. I mean, this is going back to things I've said a million times before about how stories inform our views of the world. And so, yeah, I don't really know what you want me to say. I hope I hope I've accomplished something that's like comprehensible in some way. It's nice and it's romantic that Jim was like, no, you are enough. Pam's whole concern was that I'm not enough for you. And Jim's like, you are enough. I disagree with this because I don't think one person can ever really be everything. I think there's this lyric, it's like you can complement me. You can fit into my life. We can fit together and we can build a life together. But you cannot make me whole. You are not responsible for making me whole. So this is something, the way they said it was romantic and very sweet, but I think expecting to be enough for your significant other is like wildly unreasonable. You are not made to fill their lives. You are not made to be their entire universe. That is limiting the world so much. And I don't mean to, not be romantic in that way, but there are multiple pieces of your life that you require fulfillment in. And it's not just your romantic relationships. So was Pam ever enough for Jim? No, and she shouldn't have been. Just like Jim didn't need to be enough for Pam. They could and they did eventually build a life together filled with pieces that made both of them happy and fulfilled. I basically live for Olivie Blake is not writing. That's so nice. Thank you. I'm mildly concerned that I'm the rebound in a newly started relationship. I'm not rebounding, but he might. He might probably be, and it concerns me. Any thoughts? Okay. Well, there's a time factor. This is how you know you're a rebound. Did he literally just get out of a relationship? Like, we're not talking really months here. We're talking like days, weeks, hours. We're certainly not talking years. Did he just get out of a serious relationship? Did he just get out of a relationship, a serious relationship? Is he notably damaged in some way? Or does he continually compare you to his ex? Usually this will happen in like a favorable way, like, oh, she never let me do this and you do this, or like she never did this and blah, blah, blah. Do you find that he brings her up? Or him? I'm sorry. I don't know who the ex is. Oh my God, Siri is recording this. I wonder how Siri was going to answer that question. Or is he purposely not mentioning her name? Can he mention her name? If he can't say her name, there might be some issues. Again, this is all within a certain timeline, okay? So you want to check for if there's still sort of unresolved problems with his previous relationship, if it just happened very recently. If you are the rebound, I don't think rebound relationships last all that long. So I think you're probably going to find out pretty soon. I don't generally approve of tests, like at least not tests for the sake of testing, But I mean, usually the rebound is about fixing whatever went wrong with the previous relationship. So if that means that you need to stand your ground a little bit more and see if he digs his heels in, or she, again, I'm so sorry, I should really get better with pronouns, but if they are like digging their heels in a little bit because it's still about them, because they're still healing and they're not recovered, then that's probably a pretty good sign. If they're not willing to give you certain things that you want, if they're making you feel like your demands are unreasonable, that's, you know what, remember how I told you to make a list of 10 things you require in a relationship? If you didn't make one, then make one now and check to make sure they are meeting all of those qualifications. Because I think if you're in a relationship with someone who's rebounding, they are unlikely to be providing you everything that you want from them. I mean, I think I've been the rebound before. And I think you don't really notice. It's kind of like there's this weird blindfold over your eyes and you're just like, oh, this is so great. And like, it's so nice that I am here for him. Only to find out later, like, oh, that was pretty temporary. The only thing I can tell you is just, if you haven't made that list already, definitely make that list, and then just check it, you know, and not even in a paranoid way. I don't want you to be paranoid. I don't want you to be worried that you're the rebound. I just want you to be making sure the relationship is meeting your needs. Because I think when you're in a relationship with someone who is rebounding, it is very much about their needs and about healing them and getting them through it. Which is nice and great, and yes, you have to be there for the people in your lives. From time to time, it can be more about them than it is about you, just like sometimes it'll be more about you than it is about them. Just make sure they're not breaking any of those fundamental relationship rules. As long as they are still giving you what you require in a relationship, that's fine. And if you need to stop them and say, hey, you're not giving me what I want from this relationship, I don't feel like I'm getting my needs met, you're not doing these things, you don't call when you say you will, or, you know, we make plans and you break them. And if they are like opposed to changing their behaviors for you, then that's just a relationship that's failing, whether it's a rebound or not. So yeah, basically, don't worry about if it's a rebound or not. If it is, I mean, there's a reason those things don't typically work out, because you're basically just filling in a hole, not sexually speaking. You're basically just filling in the vacancy that another person has left behind, and that can be very necessary for that person moving forward. That doesn't mean you can't have a meaningful relationship with them. Does mean you're likely to get hurt, but you're likely to get hurt in like any relationship. And I know that's like pretty cynical advice. That's not even advice. That's just the truth. Just always be aware of what you want and what you deserve, and don't lose sight of that. That's all I can tell you. Okay, so happy Halloween week. Yeah, I will probably update this with links to Lovey Tangle Vices when it comes out. If you have any interest, I'm very excited about it. It's a pretty good Halloween read, so yeah. I really hope you guys like it. Definitely feel free to let me know if you do. Yeah. Anyway, super cool that you guys like listen to me when I do this. I don't know why, but thanks for being here. I love you. So yeah, this has been me, Olivie Blake, not writing, and I'll see you next week.